in prayer because Sondra's got some things to talk to us about, and we're eager to hear from the Heartland. So I feel to open with Psalm 133, a song of ascents of David. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. That's the international version. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. And for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life evermore. So, Lord, we just lift up our fellowship from Australia to Israel. Lord, that we can stand together in unity. Although it's a distance, we can cover that distance with prayer, words of loving kindness, and in any way, physical help to even write letters to people who are living in the land in the war, or to give financial offerings. Lord, we stand in unity with Israel, and we know that you are sovereign and you will prevail. And Lord, join us together evermore in unity and love. Praise you, Lord. Amen. So, Sondra, would you like to talk to us? We would love to hear from you.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, hello, everybody. Yeah, it's a very hot summer day here. Unlike what it's like in Australia, I'm sure. And the UK, I know you think you're in summer, but you really don't understand summer. Come visit Israel, and then you'll see what summer really is. Okay, so this is. I was talking to Pam yesterday about what we're going to talk about today, and I said to her, I feel bad because the last months already that we've had these meetings, almost every meeting is like bad news. It's so depressing. I don't know if people want to keep hearing about all this depressing stuff, but it is what's going on. And I know that all of you care deeply about Israel and you want to know what's really going on. And so with that introduction, I will, share with you a bit. So, as you know, the war that began on October 7th with the horrific massacre, Hamas massacre of so many people, and people in their homes in the south, and the hostages and all of that. And then shortly after that, the war began as we launched an offensive to try to defeat Hamas, to prevent, with two goals in mind, to ultimately prevent them from continuing to rule in Gaza, on the one hand, on the other hand, to release the hostages. Since then, some hostages have been released. Some of them were released in a deal in November. About 2 weeks ago, we had an amazing, wonderful news with 4 hostages being liberated by the IDF. And it was like so special. It was so exciting. And to see such a precise operation that was planned. They had worked on it for weeks. They had intelligence that these people were there, and they worked on it for weeks, and it just went off mostly without a hitch. Unfortunately, one of the soldiers was killed in the process. And that was in many ways a highlight, because what we are seeing is that the war is dragging on. And things have changed in the way the war is being prosecuted. Until about the end of February, the war was, first of all, on that first day, they called up 350,000 reserve soldiers. Most of the regular army, plus these 350,000 soldiers, were immediately mobilized, most in and around Gaza, some in the north. And it was very intensive fighting until the end of February. Now, what happened at the end of February is that most of the reserve soldiers came home. Some did not, and some came home and then were called up again a few weeks or a month or two later. But if we look at the situation today, there are far fewer reserve soldiers that are being mobilized today than they were, until the end of February. And that means that there's also a lot less fighting going on, or a lot less in the fighting. Now, one of the things that happened there in between was international pressure. The United States in particular, but also Europe and other countries. First of all, we have these horrific assertions that Israel's committing war crimes. We have the prosecution in The Hague that Israel is committing genocide. And I mean, all this, and it's horrific. As a result of this, the United States is pressuring Israel to slow down, to not go into Rafah, to immediately to arrange for various humanitarian corridors so that food can get in. But the result of all of this is, first of all, there was a tremendous delay in going into Rafah. Rafah is at the south of the Gaza Strip. It was the next point that needed to be taken. And it didn't get taken until very recently. They only went into Rafah recently. And they've gone into Rafah now. They're fighting there, no question. And their focus is on the Philadelphia passageway, which is the crossing from Gaza to Egypt. And it is the way all, or for the most part, the weapons came in from Iran or from wherever they're coming to Gaza. There are underground tunnels that go from Egypt to Gaza. And this is how most of the things were smuggled in. And it's very possible that some of the things were smuggled in above ground, because we know that the Egyptian officials at the border are corrupt and easily bribed. And we know that that whole area was what enabled all the weapons and the technology and everything to come into Hamas. So the focus that Israel has right now is to take over that area, and it is mostly under Israeli control right now. But there was a tremendous delay until that happened. Egypt wasn't happy. America wasn't happy. And the result then, during that part of delay, is that people from Hamas, the Hamas terrorists, through the tunnels that still exist, started going back to the northern parts of Gaza and the central parts of Gaza that Israel had already taken over. And they're hiding amongst the refugees. Now, Israel, we are being accused of genocide. All right. So basically, because of this pressure coming from America, Israel reduced the intensity of its fighting, which enabled Hamas to come back up as we're evacuating. And we're also very careful to evacuate civilians before we attack a certain area. And what's happened then is these Hamas terrorists mingle with the civilians that are given safe passage to other parts of Gaza to enable them to escape from the fighting. The unfortunate part, of course, is that, first of all, how do you define a civilian? The vast majority of the so-called civilians in Gaza support Hamas. Okay, they think that this massacre was wonderful. Also, when you think about a war, usually in a classic war, you can tell who the soldiers are because they're wearing uniforms or they're carrying guns or whatever. But in the case of Hamas, there's no uniforms. And a 15-year-old boy can as easily be a terrorist as a 30-year-old man. And so, so this has become a real problem in that we are bending over backwards to try to protect civilians, all the while being accused of massacring civilians. And what the result is that our soldiers are being killed. We are having a real problem succeeding in this war, finishing this war, getting rid of Hamas. In many ways, the international community has tied our hands behind our back. And one of the most, I think, clearest ways of seeing this is with the humanitarian aid. Now, initially, Israel said, we're going to have a total blockade. We're not going to allow any humanitarian aid coming into Gaza because that's the only way to get them to surrender or whatever. But at the end, the international community forced us to bring in economic aid. Now, what happens is that the economic aid, 80% of the economic aid is taken by Hamas. They then take this aid and either use it for their own people, that's their priority, so that their fighters, their terrorists, are fed really well. The rest of it, they're selling at enormous prices to the poor people in Gaza. The international community should be ashamed of itself. It is going out of its way to pressure Israel to let this food in, but is doing nothing to ensure that the food actually goes to the people who are supposed to get it. And it's such an absurd situation. I can't even, I mean, I've said enough. It's crazy. It's crazy. So when we look at what's happening today, we are bogged down in a war. More and more of our soldiers are being killed. Here in Karnei Shomron, 7 soldiers from Karnei Shomron, and we're a tiny community. We're 11,000 people. I mean, we're a nice-sized community compared to many communities in Judea and Samaria, but a town of 11,000 people, 7 soldiers have been killed from this community alone since October 7th. There was a funeral last Tuesday of a 19-year-old soldier who was, he's actually, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Moshe Feiglin. He was a member of Knesset at one point. So this is his grandson. And young, he had only drafted into the army in the summer. He was accepted into an elite commando unit. And because of the war, they cut their training short and put them in the fighting before they had completed the training. There was another young man, also 19, a good friend of his, also from Karnei Shomron, that was injured in that initial battle and succumbed to his wounds a few days ago. His funeral was on Sunday. So just in our own community, you know, we had a military cemetery. You know, we have a regular cemetery. It's funny when I think about it. When we moved here in 1987, there was one grave in that cemetery. We were a new community, and the one grave that was in that cemetery was someone who had been killed, a boy who had been killed by terrorists back in the 80s. And now, you know, over the years, then we added a military section of the cemetery. And until this war, there were 3 soldiers in that military cemetery. And now we've filled up and and you know, here we are, just one little community, and we're saying, oh, when is this going to end? And we're proud of our soldiers, and they're risking their lives, and they're doing very important work. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we accomplishing anything? And there's been a tremendous crisis of confidence in Israel vis-a-vis our leadership, both the military leadership and the political leadership. Are they standing up with enough backbone to the Americans? That's the political leadership. The military leadership, are they doing what needs to be done? They were the ones who failed so miserably on October 7th. Of course, we have many, many questions about that, and there will be an investigation about exactly what happened and how was it that that it took so long. Even if they were surprised, why did it take so long for the army to come and rescue these people from the terrorist onslaught? So, of course, all this contributes to a very difficult time. Are the people who are running the country know what they're doing? And this is very, very difficult. So, other than being so terribly depressing about all of that, I would say that on the other hand, the people of Israel are amazing. And we are seeing so many incidents of volunteers, of people going out of their way to help in any way they can. The culture of Israel is a very can-do, you know, let's get it done kind of culture, which means if you see a problem and you are not sure that your government or whatever is going to take care of it, then you do it yourself. And this is something that is very, very typical Israeli, and there's many other countries that you don't see that same kind of independent spirit taking place. And I think this is particularly true if I look at what's happening now and focusing now just in Judea and Samaria. The rest of the country, okay, the middle of the country is at this point very much back to normal, okay, except for the people who are still serving in the army. But there's shops and businesses and things have really gone back to normal. Where have we not gone back to normal? In the south, the area just outside of Gaza, where it's still too dangerous for people to go back, and in the north, because Hezbollah is just bombing away at the north of Israel. Many of the northern communities were evacuated. 60,000 people have been evacuated from their homes in the north, and they cannot go back. And it's just 2 weeks ago, there were enormous fires all across communities in the north of Israel because of these Hezbollah attacks. And on the one hand, we can say, thank God, their civilians are not there. They're not being killed. On the other hand, it's a terrible situation where the north of Israel is empty because we cannot protect our people there. There are some people that are farmers, for example, dairy farmers, who won't leave because they have to milk their cows and they can't move their cows. And so they're still there under the fire. It's a horrific, horrific situation. And then again, we are looking at our leadership and we're saying, what solutions are you providing? And they have no solutions. They have no predictions. They have no vision as to where we're going. And so this all adds to all of this thing. So we see, for example, in the north, where you have local initiatives, we have well, of course, the IDF is there very much so, and they're fighting back, but there's been no offensive against Lebanon, and this is something many of us think needs to happen sooner rather than later. But there are individuals, those farmers who are coming and risking their lives to milk their cows, and the people who are in the rapid response teams who are there, the firefighters, etc. So let's look at Judea and Samaria. On the one hand, Judea and Samaria is the middle of the country. We are not directly threatened, not by what's going on in the south, not by what's going on in the north, but on the other hand, we have Hamas next door. In Judea and Samaria, we have our communities. We're over 500,000 Jews living in communities dotted throughout a very large area in between and next to Arab villages, towns, and cities. Now, the main difference between Judea and Samaria and Gaza, for example, in Gaza in 2005, we completely withdrew our civilians and our military from Gaza. In Judea and Samaria, thank God that never happened, which means that even though there are Hamas terrorist cells throughout Judea and Samaria, and some villages and towns are known as being Hamas centers, we know that the population, the overwhelming majority of the population here, supports the attack of October 7th. But at the same time, the IDF is here. The IDF is at bases all over the place. They're going in and out of these Arab cities. So we're in a much better situation than what was going on in Gaza. On the other hand, there hasn't been a lot of change here from an official point of view in preparing the communities in the event that the Hamas or anyone else here in Judea and Samaria would decide to do a similar kind of invasion and massacre. And in many ways, it would be very easy for them to do it because if I look out, from my community, if I go to the edge of my community, the Arab village is literally in spitting distance. Okay, it's a few hundred meters away. And so it really would be easy and take no time. We wouldn't have any warning time if they would suddenly decide to cross into Karnei Shomron and start attacking. So on the one hand, you could say, well, the army is here, but on the other hand, we don't have much in the way of warning. Now, of course, the army is here and intelligence and all that is here. And so they do prevent attacks that could have happened. But if I talk about Israel, the people of Israel taking initiative, Judea and Samaria is a very, very good example of that. Our communities have looked around themselves and they are saying, what do we need to protect our people, to ensure that if there is an attack coming from these neighboring Arab villages, that we won't be attacked? And I have to say, and I'm very proud to say, that CFOIC has become a major, if not the major, force to work with the communities and ensure that they are protected and have what they need. Since October 7th, we have raised money from people like you, some people giving a little bit of money and some people giving a lot of money. It really doesn't matter because it all comes together. And we have purchased additional security cameras. We have purchased equipment. Now, we are involved in civilian protection. We are not replacing the army. We are not buying guns. We are not doing any of that stuff. That we don't need. We have a very active, powerful army. But we do need things that help us provide warning, warning systems on the fences themselves, cameras, emergency medical equipment. We are just now set up a new emergency medical and security center serving the communities of Telem and Adurah, south of Hebron. That is something that we're just able to complete, both the equipment and the building, thanks to donors like you. And there's many more examples. Now, there was an article in one of the news sources a few days ago, a very detailed analysis about what's going on along the Jordan Valley. Now, the Jordan Valley is along Israel's eastern border. Jordan has always been considered for quite a long time a quiet neighbor. We have not had real problems from Jordan in a very long time. What is happening now recently is that there's a huge increase in smuggling that is going on across the Jordanian border, where arms are coming in to Judea and Samaria from Jordan. Now, again, this has its roots in Iran. This has its roots in Hamas. But what we're seeing is Jordan is not doing what it needs to do to stop it, either that they can't or they don't want to. And so the Israeli army is forced to do a lot more. And Israeli army is stretched so thin right now between fighting in the north, fighting in the south, fighting in Judea and Samaria. They are not effective enough in preventing all of these ammunition coming in across the border in the Jordan Valley. What can we do about this? We can at least make sure that the communities in the Jordan Valley are protected as much as possible. We've had enormous requests for ATVs, all-terrain vehicles. They can be used for security. They're used for patrols. They're used to, like we have security professionals, right, in every community. And there's a camera or some kind of a sensor that says, here, there's a infiltration. Here, there's a terrorist on the way. How do you get there? We need to make sure we have these vehicles available so they hop into a vehicle and they zoom over there. And these same vehicles also are not limited to traveling on normal roads. They can go into the fields in between the communities where the terrorists will hide, and they have the ability to travel there as well. So that's just one example of the kind of thing that we're involved with here at CFOIC. So on the one hand, I've painted a very, very dismal picture of a difficult time in Israel, a lot of confusion, a lack of confidence, and not really knowing what comes next, and I'm a news addict. I always have been a news addict. I'm watching the news all the time. I'm listening to all the analyses. And of course, there's political agendas behind different news analysts. But if you clear away the agendas, you can come to something that whether you're on the right or the left, there's a tremendous distress at the fact that we are not accomplishing enough. And of course, the hostages are still there. There are about 100 hostages, but at least 30 of them have been confirmed dead. So we're talking still about 75 hostages that are presumed to be alive, maybe 79. Okay, and that's a huge issue. That's a huge issue. And of course, Sinwar has no interest in releasing them. And what he wants is the war to stop. But if we stop the war to release the hostages, then we're just going to be facing another October 7th in a few months or in a year. And so these are the issues that we're dealing with. It's not pretty. It's not easy. But as a people, and again, when I focus on Judea and Samaria, our communities are dealing with this. We are looking it in the face and saying, what can we do? And doing whatever we can. I would just like to conclude with something that I know I've used this before, but when I think about what's happening, and when I think about how we respond to these things. Now, we are all people of faith. And I think that when you look at something in the face and you realize we have military issues and security issues and issues of trust with our government, etc., all of that is very, very depressing. But at the end of the day, we have faith in God. And if there's one thing that gives us a sense of optimism, I can look at all this and I say it's very depressing, and yet I'm still smiling and I'm not running anywhere. Okay. Because there's no question in my mind, we are going to come out of this. How long it will take, we don't know that. We don't know that, but we know we will. And one of the verses, the biblical scriptures that I find so expressive of this whole idea is David facing Goliath. Okay, and he's just amazing. David says to Goliath, and I'm quoting now from 1 Samuel chapter 17. He says, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the ranks of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will kill you and cut off your head, and I will give the carcasses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. All the earth shall know that there is a God in Israel. And this whole assembly shall know that the Lord can give victory without sword or spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hands." Now, it's very important to realize David did not just stand there and invoke God's name and do nothing. He did something. Now, he may not have had a sword. He didn't have a spear. In fact, there's a beautiful scene just before this when David comes before Saul and says, "I'll do it." And Saul looks at him. He's short. Remember, Saul is very tall. Okay. And Saul looks at David. He's kind of short. He's not a soldier, right? And so he gives him his helmet and his armor, and he gives it to David. He says, "You're going to need this," right? And David puts it on, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. It's too big on him. It's too heavy. He can't use it. He says, "No, this is not going to work." And he puts it away. But he still has his slingshot and his stones. Now, you could say the slingshot and the stones, well, that is really silly. Okay. But in the end, what downed Goliath? The slingshot and the stones. He did something. He didn't sit by and say, "Okay, God, do this. I'm going to sit by and watch you." Okay. He did something. And I think this is the golden combination. Okay. He wasn't very good with his armor. He wasn't very good with a sword. Okay. And he had this brilliant idea, very clever, to use the slingshot. But at the same time, he knew that without God's favor, this stupid slingshot was not going to work. He knew that at the end of the day, if he did succeed, it was going to be thanks to the glory of God. And he made that very clear. And that's like an amazing combination. And that's our combination. Okay, we've got to do our best. Things look bad. We have a great army. Okay, but it's not big enough. We are having trouble engaging enemies on two fronts. Okay, we are not going into Gaza, into Lebanon now because we're too involved in Gaza. Okay, that's a real limitation. That's our slingshot. Okay, we may have a great army and good planes and all that kind of stuff, but we don't have enough people to engage 2 or 3 different fronts at once. This is a real limitation. But what we do have is our faith, and we do have the ability to call upon God. And I have to tell you, today, if you see these soldiers fighting, they're all calling upon God. There are a few that don't, but most of them do. And I think that this is our secret weapon. And we've got to keep doing whatever we can, even if it's only a slingshot. If we at CFOIC is able to buy some of these ATVs and help the communities, that's our slingshot. But it's a slingshot that can really help. And it's going to help because everything we're doing in the name of God, and we're doing in the name of our faith. So that's what I have to present to you today. But I would love to have time to kind of open this up for discussion. We have time. So maybe, Pam, you want to monitor that discussion so everybody has a chance to say something, and I'll be happy to answer whatever questions I can.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Sondra. We have allowed a lot of time for questions and answers today. So please bring your questions. Mark,
Yeah,
say hello to
thanks.
Sondra.
Thanks very much, Sondra. You probably answered my question. I'll put it to you anyway. I've seen a few reports over the months about Israeli soldiers or Israeli reservists saying that the government's tying their hands, or that the military leadership is tying their hands in terms of finishing the war in Gaza. Is that your perspective of the situation, and what could be done to untie those hands, and what should be done in Gaza?
I think until the end of February, there was very little tying hands. There was some. In other words, I don't know. When you're fighting against a country or you're fighting against a group of people who are trying to kill you, do you give them warning and say, okay, everybody, we can give you 2 days to evacuate before we attack? When you do that, what happens is some of the terrorists escape together with these civilians, so-called civilians that are escaping. Why do we have to do this? So this is one kind of tying the hands. Also, the giving of the military, of the humanitarian aid. So that's not tying the hands in terms of what you could do militarily, but it is making the military effort that much more difficult to succeed. The tying the hands militarily started later, when the next natural thing would have been to go into Rafah, and that wasn't done. And that only started happening a few weeks ago. And when it started, it is not starting on a massive scale, but on a very small scale. And that's definitely happening right now. And that's coming from the government. And it's coming from the government because of international pressure. It's also possible. There have been a number of attempts at hostage deals. And I don't understand why anybody would reduce fighting before a hostage deal was actually made. But for some reason, some of the fighting was more limited in order to encourage the Gazans to enter into a hostage deal, which, if you ask me, makes absolutely no sense. And I'm not the only one saying this, by the way. In other words, if you want a hostage deal, you want to ram them militarily so they feel desperate enough to say, stop, stop, stop. And if the only way we can get you to stop is we give you back the hostages, okay, that makes sense. And of course, no one in Israel is willing to accept a permanent end of the war, but we are willing to consider a certain amount of time of a break in the war in order to get the hostages back. But it means to get all the hostages back. And one of the advantages we would have in a break in the war would be maybe that would give us the time to go and take care of the North. But, you know, as we are seeing now, this is really not happening, not enough. And this is very frustrating for us.
Yeah. Thank you, Sondra. Anne, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Sondra, regarding two things, the humanitarian aid, just only in the last couple of days, United Nations report fails to find famine in northern Gaza. A report said there's no famine at all. So, this humanitarian aid and this nonsense going on is just a farce it seems to be pushed by the US. They have this insatiable reason for wanting to throw truckloads and truckloads of whatever it is into Gaza. They have the pier that they spent $400 million on. It broke. Then they rebuild it, and now they're going to disband. Oh, I love it. It's got to be God. Just got the thing and just chucked it in the ocean. I thought, oh, hallelujah, God. Just as you said, you can see God in this. Is just absolute nonsense. And then just only the last couple of days, it seems to be there's still somebody in that military that are really in disobedience to the government. They said they wanted to have a ceasefire to allow humanitarian things to go into some place in Rafah. And the government didn't even know about it. The Prime Minister didn't even know anything about it at all. So
okay, right. I know what you're referring to with that.
Yeah.
Okay, that was actually something that was misreported, it turns out. That was a situation where there was one road, okay, that they said they were going to cease attacking along that road to enable humanitarian either people or food to get through. It wasn't a ceasefire. It had been reported as if it was a ceasefire. And then people went to the army and they said, well, is there a ceasefire? And they said, no, what are you talking about? And then the government said, I don't know what you're talking about. And then it became clear that they were referring to two different things. And what had happened was The military just said for this certain period of time to enable safe patches, which is what they have been doing, to enable people to leave, to enable food to get through, etc. That whether or not that's a good thing, that's a separate question, but that has been part of the policy of the war. I think it's very problematic. There's a very old statement going back in Jewish tradition to our sages that says, if you are kind to cruel people, you will end up being cruel to kind people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this statement says so much about what's going on today. I mean, people want to give humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. These are cruel people.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is because they're going out of their way to give humanitarian aid to these people, in the end, you're going to have more soldiers dying. You're going to have Hamas remaining in power with the ability to continue killing the good people in Israel. And not to mention that all these people still can't come back to their homes, who are living in hotels, who are living, in temporary situations. And that is really a problem. And I think that this whole moral world that has grown, I mean, war is a terrible thing. Nobody wants war. But if you are dealing with an enemy that is out to destroy you, that represents the most immoral positions,
Evil,
cruel positions, if this is who your enemy is, you are going to be doing something immoral if you don't fight them. And yes, war is messy and innocent people can get killed, and all that is true. But there is no choice, because we live in an imperfect world, and there's no way that we can make sure. We don't even know who are the good people and the bad people, right? And this is something that we see also, the double standard, that when America was doing all it was doing in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were, oh my gosh, there was a statistic, I don't remember it by heart, but it was showing the percentage of non-involved civilians or whatever killed for every terrorist killed. Okay, and Americans killed far more civilians compared to terrorists than we have. It is such hypocrisy for them to be pressuring us. And they did what they were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. And frankly, they fled from Afghanistan with their tails between their legs because they had failed. But you know what? They had nothing to lose in Afghanistan, so they failed. Afghanistan is thousands of kilometers away from the United States. They're failing in the sense of, did they fail so tomorrow New York City is going to be attacked? No. For us, failure is a direct threat to the existence of the state of Israel. How can we take that into account? How can we take that risk? And this is what is so frustrating for us, the hypocrisy.
Yeah. And the other thing, Sondra, is about the Biden administration. You've got Jake Sullivan. You've got these people coming over all the time, speaking to Gantz, and Gantz should be held for treason. I mean, what's wrong with this guy? They seem to want to kill their own nation, and this jolly Biden administration are hell-bent on destroying you. They're doing everything. They're tying hands. They're just the nonsense and the lies. And then he's Biden would be doing some Muslim holiday and wishing all the Muslims well. And what about the Jewish people? Oh, it's just, it's despicable. Absolutely despicable.
Well, I don't think Gantz is a traitor. I don't agree with everything he says, but he's definitely has the good and best interests of Israel in mind. It's just why we don't agree on what those interests are. There was somebody, Judy, I think you wrote in the chat, you asked about my opinion of Benny Gantz leaving the war cabinet, leaving the government. I don't think it's accomplishing anything. I think, I don't agree with everything, but from what I understand, he and Netanyahu actually agreed on most things, but Netanyahu was feeling pressured by all kinds of others to do different things. It's very hard for me to know. I do think that Netanyahu has to set a date for elections because there is a fundamental lack of trust in the government, in the Knesset. I think the mandate has to go back to the people so that we have an opportunity to vote in a new government and see. Is Netanyahu given a vote of confidence or no? Will there be other people that we have more confidence in? I personally am not thrilled with Netanyahu. He speaks right, but he doesn't act right. And I think that he is he's ending up being much weaker than he used to be. And that's very unfortunate.
Excellent, Sondra. Yeah, Judy, that was good. Your question was answered. Joy, it's lovely to see you.
Yes, I think Judy is even asking about elections during a war. But my question, Sondra, was about the Haredi, if that's how you pronounce them. Will they ever be drafted in? What's your thoughts on all of that?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Just for those who may not be as aware as you are, Joy, of what's going on, the Haredi or the ultra-Orthodox are people that absolutely refuse to serve in the army. I think their position is horrible. I have no way to justify it. I'm a person of faith. I believe in studying the Bible. There is absolutely no question that with prayer and with studying the Bible, we add a dimension to our existence here that is not as we talked about with David and Goliath. You know, it's not just how many weapons we have, etc., but we still need our weapons. And the ultra-Orthodox position is that they're studying Bible all day, so they don't need them as soldiers because they're contributing as studying Bible. And it's just not true. That's not biblical. It's not a biblical approach. We don't have a single biblical hero who just prayed and didn't fight. There's no such thing. Joshua and David and Saul and every single one of the kings, they all fought. The question was, as part of their fighting, did they also pray? Okay, but not you know, and it's very hypocritical as well, because these are people who are not willing to put themselves in danger. I say, if you're so convinced that you are, you don't need to fight, that just your studies will happen. So go and live in these places along the Gaza envelope or in the north that have been evacuated. Study there. And you don't need to be worried because nothing's going to happen to you because you're studying Bible. Well, of course, they're not willing to do that. They're afraid. I think what they're saying is that about studying Bible is an excuse. I think at the end of the day, they're afraid. They're most afraid about too much contact between their young people and more secular Israel. And the truth of the matter is the army has gone out of its way to accommodate their ultra-Orthodox soldiers. The entire army is kosher anyway, and it's just a silly thing. I would think people like myself, for example, aside from any of the other issues that we're involved with, we really feel like I will tell you right now, when I go to vote at this next elections, one of the most important issues for me is going to be the parties that say we will not make a deal with the ultra-Orthodox that enables them to continue avoiding the army. With the chief of staff of the Israeli army says we do not have enough soldiers. How can a whole population of people who are Jews, who are part of the Jewish people, how can they, with any justification, stand by and say we don't have to serve? It makes absolutely no sense.
That brings that opening prayer about unity, Sondra. Unity within the land and within the people. That opens up that prayer that I was led to pray. Because they need to stand up in unity with all their fellow brothers and sisters. Okay. So Judy did ask about Benny Gantz leaving the war cabinet at the time of war.
Well, first of all, his leaving is not making the government fall. That's why people are wondering, like, what was the point? It could be that it's more political. In other words, he is positioning himself, realizing that elections will happen sooner rather than later, and to position himself as somebody who took a very clear stand against Netanyahu to distinguish himself in order to run as the head of his own party. So it is a political decision. It's hard for me to know to what extent he is vital for that cabinet or not. I really don't know. It is clear that his leaving the cabinet is not bringing elections, because Bibi still has 64 seats and he needs 61. He has 64. The issue, though, of the law to draft was a law that the Likud put forward, the government put forward, to enable most of the Haredim to avoid military service. And that is a very controversial law, and many in the Likud don't want to vote for it. If at the same time there were two laws being put before the Knesset at the same time, one is to continue to exempt the Haredim, and another is to extend the amount of service that both the regular army and the reserves have to do. And people are saying, how can you do that? How can you force all these people to serve longer and at the same time exempt all these other able-bodied men? And I think this is, if there's anything that's going to bring the government down, it's going to be that issue, because there's too much controversy about that within the parties that make up the government. So we'll see. We'll wonder. And again, nobody wants elections in the middle of a war. The question is, how much are we in the middle of a war right now? There's a certain level of fighting that we are going to be doing. I mean, Benny Gantz himself said that we are looking at years of continued fighting in Gaza. Years. Okay? And many people, of course, believe that we are going to have to see a more intense war in the north against Lebanon. So how long is this going to last? Can this move forward already? If there would be an agreement today to have elections, not tomorrow, but let's say in December, in January, in February, to get to a point where, yes, we're still fighting, but it's at a more stable level, I think there would be huge consensus around that. That's not like walking out of a government in the middle of a war, but saying the time has come to return the mandate to the people. And I'm hoping that Netanyahu will have the sense to agree to that.
Yes. Sondra, if you could have a read of the chat, the questions are happening in the chat. There's one from Rob.
Let's see. Would you like to see as a replacement to leave the government? Oh, who would you like to see as a replacement? Well, that's a good question. There is a group of people getting together to start a new party that is very interesting to me. Naftali Bennett, who I have always supported, and he was prime minister, together with Juden Samaria, Lieberman, and Yossi Cohen. Yossi Cohen was the head of the Mossad and retired a couple of years ago. So these people are talking with each other about setting up a party. This party would be a right-wing party, but let's say, I don't know, I think a better right-wing party than the Likud. And it's something fresh, okay, with people that have a lot of experience. I would like to see a party like that succeed. And I think Bibi needs to retire. I think he was a brilliant prime minister, but I think he's losing it, and he's lost it in many ways. And he certainly has lost the confidence of most of the people. The Likud has some very good people, okay, but you have to kind of see how that shakes out. But this new party is very interesting. Another question: do you feel qualified to speak about the purity of arms policy in the army? I don't understand what that is. What's a purity of arms policy? No, can't fire first until fired on.
I heard, Sondra, several statements that a soldier can't fire first until he's fired upon. Can't respond.
No, that's That's not in an offensive war. That's if you are, you're patrolling an area. That's different. Like in Juden Samaria, patrolling an area. You see somebody there. You don't just shoot them. Okay. But if he looks suspicious, you can call out to him, halt. It's more like a police kind of thing. You halt. And if they don't halt or if they resist, then you can shoot them. But certainly that doesn't apply for actual fighting in a combat situation. That is, if the offensive is the offensive, you shoot everything in sight. And that's something really that I know. Now, you asked about my sons. Right now, one son, the one who was in greatest danger, who was in Gaza, he's been back home since the end of February. He will be called up when they go north and when they go into Lebanon. Then it's probably when he'll be called up, and we don't know when that'll happen, but whenever that happens, that's the assumption, and that's when he will be called up again. And I have another son who was in protection of Judea in the area of Efrat and Tekoa, Gush Etzion, and he's back in the army on reserve duty doing that. And in fact, there was an attempted infiltration into Efrat about a week ago that they were very involved with. And thank God nothing happened. They were able to stop that. That's it. But that's certainly not this fire first. You can fire first. If something is threatening, not just at some civilian, of course.
Judy, you're doing good typing there. Judy's put another question.
Oh, I see. Do you think that Israel will lead an offensive operation against Iran with their interest in enriching uranium? Good question. I mean, I think it was real. I don't know why Israel didn't attack Iran years ago when they had the information and they had not yet reached a level in enriching uranium that they are at today. I don't know. I have no idea. There's certainly a conversation. Again, an offensive operation doesn't, in the case of Iran, nobody is talking about let's take our army and move against Iran. That's not going to be. We're not big enough to do that kind of thing. But certainly, Israel would like to see more effective sanctions against Iran. And again, the kinds of operations that have been going on is more covert operations, against high-ranking people, etc. I'm assuming that will continue and may even increase. I don't know. But Israel cannot take on Iran by themselves. No question.
So Sondra, do you think...
Sondra, one other question, if I may. You spoke a little earlier about the mood of the Israeli people. I'm just curious to know what the mood of the Israeli people is in relation to the specific question of ceasefire negotiations. Does the majority of the Israeli population want a ceasefire along the lines of what the Americans and so forth have been talking about? And with in relation to the recent protests, to what extent do these do or do not reflect the majority of the Israeli public's view?
Okay, well, there's a lot of different kinds of protests. The ones that I think do command a large degree of support are the ones that are just calling for do whatever needs to be done to release the hostages, that keep out the political messages. Okay, there are groups like that, and basically, and it's being led by the families of the hostages themselves. I think most people in Israel feel that the families themselves are suffering immeasurably. They have the right to say whatever they want to say. It may not be good stuff. It may not be stuff that's, I sometimes become concerned if they pressuring Israel to do whatever it takes to release the hostages. Sinwar is listening to this as well. And he's saying, oh, great. I can make it more difficult because I have this tremendous pressure of the hostages' families. So in that way, I think the families of the hostages are maybe serving the interests of Hamas, but on the other hand, I can't blame them. They have their families there, their loved ones. They're not politicians. They're not leaders. They are just saying, do what needs to be done. I would say there's a consensus in Israel, real broad consensus in Israel, that if we agree to a ceasefire, it's a temporary ceasefire only, okay? Not anything that will commit us to ending this war. That is something that Israel cannot agree to, because we're just going back to the beginning and opening ourselves up to worse. also there's a consensus that if you're going to do a deal, the deal should be for all the hostages, not just for a few. So, these are issues that are come up, but the issue of hostages is a very, very difficult one, because these are people that in many ways Israel failed. These people, the terrorists came over, and it was hours until anyone came to help rescue them. And there is a responsibility there for the government of Israel. On the other hand, the government of Israel can't do anything that will ultimately put the people of Israel in danger. And so these are the issues that it's a very difficult decision. But at this point, even when Israel has gone quite a distance to accommodate and to give up positions that it previously held, Sinwar rejects it anyway. So, which is why many of us are so frustrated and feeling like if we had put more severe military pressure on Gaza, then we would be more accomplishing, not just in getting rid of Hamas, but also in getting the hostages released, because they would feel that kind of pressure. That's the kind of pressure that talks.
Okay. We're coming to 8 o'clock. Are there any other questions that you would like to ask Sondra? No, thank you so much. Oh, John? Yes, go, John.
Hi, Sondra. It's probably a question you can't answer, but what sort of is amazing me at the moment is I'm getting reports that certain sections of the IDF knew about the plans 7 weeks before they happened, but and reported them, but nothing happened. And the other thing that I get quite amazing hearing from on the ground commanders is that a lot of the heads of the IDF have not been held accountable for anything that's taken place. And I find that, quite amazing. There's not much talk about it either, but I'm just interested in your perspective.
Okay, so first of all, no question, part of what has to be investigated, and there's been a little bit of investigation, and that's also a pressure now. The time has come already to have a proper government, or it's an independent commission, like the government appoints an independent commission of inquiry, and it's usually staffed by judges and different people that don't have a direct interest in the outcome, to investigate and see what's going on. And that's one of the big questions. This report that was presented in the summer, why wasn't this taken seriously? Now, in terms of the army and the generals, now there are some who have left, and the chief of staff is still there, and he's made it very clear that he knows he's going to leave, but he is still the one running the war. And so it's a difficult situation when the people who are most equipped to run the army are the ones who were ultimately part of that failure. Do you drop them in the middle of a war when you need them? And most people feel that he is doing a good job running this war, that the problems with running the war are not coming from the military, but they're coming from the political echelons who are restraining what can be done. So that's that aspect of things. So there's no question at some point many generals will go, and certainly the government, there will need to be elections.
Ruth, you have a question you'd like to sneak in there?
Yeah, this 11th hour question. I was reading Psalm 50. It says, "Call upon me in the day of trouble and I will deliver you." I just wondered what your impression is of the spiritual nature. Are people turning to prayer more than they were, or how is the spiritual nature of the country at this time?
Well, we are, there's all kinds of people in Israel, and we have secular and religious and traditional, everything in between. I would say that the majority of the country has some relationship with God. Call upon God, they pray to God, and more soldiers are we're seeing this. We see, first of all, there's a lot more, the middle echelon commanders of the IDF, many of them are themselves Orthodox Jews, very, very seriously committed. So that is definitely something that we're seeing. All in all, Israel has become a more religious country in the last 10 or 20 years than it was before. It's one of the most religious of Western countries in the world, I would say. But there's all kinds of issues. In other words, I'll give you an example. This issue of the Haredi Jews and their attitude towards military service does not speak well for religion, okay? So the question is, do people look at that and say that's religion, or do they realize, oh no, that's just one very extreme representation of religion. There are other people that are very different, and we can relate to those other kind of people. So it's not a simple question. It's very hard to characterize a whole people in one way religiously, but I would say God is very present in the public sphere in Israel in general.
Thank you.
Very good.
You're still the only nation that keeps Shabbat and keeps the feasts and follows the 10 Commandments to the best of their ability. The only nation.
I mean, and you're here, Joy. You feel that even among
Yes.
people that don't call themselves Orthodox, they are a very traditional people. Don't you feel that?
Yep. My daughter said too when she came, I feel God here. The only nation where I feel God is here.
Right. Absolutely.
That's
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to wrap up by putting the CFOIC bank account details into the chat, because there's many things that we can do, but the most practical one is to give a donation. And because it's the coming to the end of the taxation year in Australia, not only can you give directly to Sondra, but through the Christians for Israel, through Ian Warby, you can donate, and then you can have a tax deduction. So if we want to flood Sondra with our tax deductions, this would be a good moment to do that. So yes, Anne.
Oh, just a quick thing on that note, Pam. Yes, that's the reason why I love CFOIC, because when you give donations overseas, your bank takes a huge chunk of the money, and then they give you this fee they charge you, and it's just crazy. So thank you, Sondra, for opening up a bank account in Australia that we just put the money straight into. We don't get charged all these crazy bank fees, all this nonsense. We just stick it in, and you get 100%. And then I love the fact that you put 100% into the communities. The thing that I ask you to do, you send me a receipt and say that money went to that community, and that's for security. Do you know what joy and it just makes me really happy to know I can make a difference? And because I'm so upset about this war and frustrated about America and the world hating you, and you're a beautiful nation of beautiful people. That so upsets me, but I know I can do something to make a difference. And yes, I thank you for making that easy. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
Right, and if I'm looking for someone to take over Joy's job that I've just taken over from Joy, we got Anne there. So, I think we got some candidates. So, well, thank you everybody for coming. And ultimately, Anne, the world hates God. Yes, it is, and that's the summary of anti-Semitism. And so, yeah, perfect understanding, Judy. So we'd like to close. I'd like to say thank you so very much, Sondra, to hear from you. And our hearts are always with you in the land and with your family and with the crew from CFOIC. Say hello to Maya, and Mia, and of course Shmuel, and We'd like to close in prayer because Psalm 121, we spoke about this, David and Goliath and God. A song of ascents. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where does my help come from? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. Your keeper will not slumber. Behold, the keeper of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your keeper. Adonai is your shadow at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. Adonai will protect you from all evil. He will guard your life. Adonai will watch over your coming and your going from this time forth and evermore. We had a beautiful Amen. We had a beautiful Amen. We had a beautiful young third generation
One second, Hannah. Can I call you back in a second?
Survivor, and he spoke at the Brisbane Never Again Is Now rally, and he was talking so passionately about the Holocaust and coming to Australia, and he learnt from his grandfather the value of forgiveness and love, and it was so moving to hear him. Some of the prayer people were saying they could see a gold kipper on him. Now, that could be the sunlight or it could be spiritual. And so we just give all the honor and the praise to a nation who knows how to proclaim the Lord and his strength and to continue. And so we just thank you, Lord, that you give the nation of Israel, every person there, Lord, the strength to continue, the strength to proclaim that you are the living God of Israel and you will prevail. Praise you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everybody, for coming. See you next month.